Want proof? Twitter? You want proof? Facebook? You want proof, you corrupt, lying, whatever you are? Here's the proof. I didn't write it. Russians didn't write it. And I didn't get the 30 million. Your prince got it. The Prince of Darkness. Joe Biden. The guy who used his son, a drug addict, to be his bag man. And you want to be president of our country? My goodness, you should check in to the local federal prison and start doing your time. That's where you belong, not in the White House. You used your family to pick up your bribes, hide your bribes, live the life of a billionaire. And by the way, I don't think you failed in all those negotiations just because you're stupid. I think you failed in those negotiations because you sold out the United States of America. That's what I think you did. And you were ready to do it again if we didn't catch you.
If China had acted in a timely manner in that 3-week window when something could have been done, 95% of the cases of COVID would never have happened, and we would not now be in the grip of a global pandemic. That situation is what we are confronting day by day.
Can you explain further what the weaponization of COVID means?
First of all, there was the control of the data.
More censorship by these companies, these social media giants. We already know that they do it. It would give them incentive to censor even more speech, even more thought, even more content. But there might be
so that nobody else could say things about what was really going on and apportion blame in the way we've been talking about. Because people simply were not confident about what we knew and did not know. It isn't just bureaucratic inefficiency, people in Wuhan scared of what their bosses in Beijing will say. This is a deliberate cover-up to maintain control, first and foremost, of what's happening inside China. We mustn't underestimate the importance of the Chinese government trying to control its own people and manage its own disasters, without, of course, the rest of the world knowing, but mostly because they're not sure of how Chinese people themselves will react. And the biggest concern at that time was what would happen if all this came out at the time of Chinese New Year. And of course, we now know that that was the worst miscalculation of all, to think you get away with allowing millions of people to travel around inside and out of China, and that would not inevitably result in what was an infection outbreak, becoming an epidemic, and then a pandemic. That was the massive error of judgment. But that error of judgment was made, I believe, in consciousness of the extent of the problem and the risks associated with it. An extraordinary state of affairs. When Chinese officials say something, that is what they are saying as the notional representatives of the Chinese people, and anybody who disagrees with that is therefore taking an anti-China position. And if you haven't got the strong enough evidence to prove it, there is this. The lie direct is an incredibly powerful political weapon used by totalitarian regimes, but the big lie is out there, and the people who are, one way or the other, captive by Chinese political and economic and other pressures have to toe the line, and if they don't support that kind of story, they're not members of the big China club.
Pushing back on big tech, overnight President Trump threatened to veto a major defense bill unless it revokes Section 230 of the 1996 Communications Decency Act. The president tweeted this in part: "Our country can never be safe and secure if we allow 230 to stand. The provision gives social media giants broad immunity from legal liability for content posted by their users." Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey told lawmakers back in October that Section 230 is the most important law protecting speech on the internet. It's also protecting Twitter from getting sued. Dagan McDowell,
I don't
your
care.
reaction.
I could care less what the fake, phony, selective outrage from the media mob is. I am not interested, nor do I think any of us should be interested in what they tell us they find offensive. The sanctimonious, high-minded, phony concern all of a sudden about American democracy. We, frankly, don't need lectures about truth, about integrity from what is a depraved group of Democratic donors, the media mob, and Democrats that never accepted the results of 2016, ever. I don't care what they think. They lied to you and us for 4 years on the most spectacular level.
These kinds of stories continue, and they have been absolutely at the heart of Australia's response, Australia's efforts to establish the truth, which of course has been seen by the Chinese Communist Party as a direct attack on its authority and its nominal truthfulness. And that has resulted in the deterioration of relations and the economic blackmail that has been exercised against Australia. Because the Australian...
A lot of other names on that list of economic advisors that both deserve just as much scrutiny, but give us the clearest glimpse yet into how exactly Biden intends on governing. And over again, we're seeing that he has not learned much from the last 5 years. Now, Tandon, in a way, is the perfect pick for Joe Biden. At her core, she embodies neoliberalism, and that she's not really committed to anything ideologically except for helping herself get ahead. She's basically willing to work with anyone and anything as long as she and her cohort in Washington get to advance themselves, which is precisely the problem. Because people without principles work with and for others without principles. Take Tandon's think tank, the Center for American Progress. Sounds nice, obviously, and I'm sure you're all familiar with her very annoying Twitter account. But in between dunking, she was out there raising money from Wall Street, big banks, tech billionaires like Mark Zuckerberg, foreign governments like the United Arab Emirates, defense contractors, the healthcare industry. She took all that money to preserve her position in Washington, and now she's going to potentially run the Office of Management and Budget. And I know, look, that agency sounds really boring, but it's immensely important. OMB, as it is known in DC, decides literally everything. They write the president's budget, they decide what gets paid for and what doesn't, they work out administration rationale for funding different agencies, they have several sub-agencies, and one of those is called the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. It's a snooze, I know, but let's put it this way. They write, develop, and oversee the implementation of government-wide policy around the technology industry. And to put it in even more practical terms, this is the same agency which could decide whether Uber or Lyft drivers are permanently classified as independent contractors. Tandon, a person who has cozied up to and taken money from the industry, will now be tasked with helping regulate it. Some of the people on Joe Biden's transition team in charge of staffing that agency literally work for Lyft. What they want out of the deal is pretty simple, if you can read between the lines. And to underscore just how key neoliberal economic policy is to neoconservative foreign policy, I present to you this leaked email from 2015, which shows how Tandon in 2011 justified the bombing of Libya in 2011 by saying, quote, "We have a giant deficit. They have a lot of oil. If we want to continue to engage in the world, gestures like having oil-rich companies partially pay us back doesn't seem crazy to me." Wow, that email is a lot scarier, considering that if confirmed, Tandon would literally be in charge of the agency that oversees the federal budget. That's just Tandon. There's another name on Biden's economic team that struck fear in my heart, though was largely unnoticed by the mainstream media. That is of Wally Adamio. Now, the media simply stopped at his identity as a black man, but I remember him for something much more important, which is that Wally was the quote-unquote senior international economic advisor to Barack Obama. So much so that Obama, after he left office, appointed him president of the Obama Foundation. But most concerning to me is that in his previous stint at the Treasury Department, he was literally the chief negotiator for the macroeconomic provisions of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which you might remember as being one of the single most important things that Trump broke from economic orthodoxy on, and was a disguised effort to combat China by continuing to offshore as many productive capacity that we even have left as a nation. If you're wondering where his real loyalties lie, right before he ran the Obama Foundation, he was a senior executive at BlackRock, the world's largest financial firm with $7 trillion under management. He was so high up, he served as chief of staff to CEO Larry Fink. And I get it. I know Deputy Treasury Secretary sounds boring, but this is literally the number 2 at the agency, and in terms of who runs the day-to-day operations, is far more consequential because they are tasked with actually implementing the president and secretary's policy on an administrative level. In other words, the person who helped design one of the worst trade deals ever and then went to go work on Wall Street is about to become one of the most powerful officials in economic policy. And finally, it's another figure, Brian Deese. Deese will reportedly run the National Economic Council inside the White House. That is the same position held by Larry Kudlow today. He previously served as President Obama's deputy director of the NEC, and he did a stint at the Office of Management and Budget. But more importantly, for our purposes, he's going to feel especially at home in a Joe Biden administration because guess where Deese currently works? I'm not making this up. He's a current investment executive at BlackRock, where he apparently runs their division, which invests in more green technology. And apparently, according to friend of the show, David Dayen, he's the one who they roll out to justify their investments in fossil fuel companies and to argue that they're being more responsible. Now look, I'm not like a Green New Deal guy or anything, but it's always gross to see paid shills be paid shills. So there you have it. Neera Tanden nominated to run OMB, the guy who negotiated TPP to be number 2 at Treasury, and a Wall Street executive paid shill to return to run the National Economic Council of Joe Biden's White House. Increasingly becoming clear, the Biden team is not just doubling down, but quadrupling down on neoliberalism and its attenuated policies. They might pretend to change somewhat in rhetoric, but as everyone who watches this show knows, personnel is policy, and the personnel so far tell us a very specific story about what the next 4 years are going to look like.
Because the Australian Prime Minister said a WHO inquiry will not prove anything, a Chinese inquiry, it has to be independent. And that triggers a massive defensive aggressive response on the part of China. The same has happened to many other states who've taken a similar position. The Chinese have weaponized this situation to increase their control over democracies, interfering in elections, interfering in elites various, interfering in parties, interfering in key national infrastructure, interfering in universities politically and as centers of excellence in research.
Drag this country through hell with Russian lies, conspiracy theories, and a hoax they pushed for years. It was all a lie. They all advanced the lie. They all advanced the conspiracy theory. There was never Trump-Russia collusion. 4 investigations, no collusion. They peddled that phony Clinton bought and paid for dirty Russian disinformation dossier. The one that I mentioned claimed that Donald Trump had hookers urinating in his bed in the Ritz-Carlton in Moscow. That's what they sold as truth to the American people for 3 years, peddling those lies. They had no problem with the phony dossier. They never retracted their phony stories. They didn't care that that phony dossier was used to secure FISA warrants to spy on a presidential candidate and then a president for 4 years. So all of you in the media mob, oh, this is a threat to democracy, asking questions about election irregularities. Save us your phony BS lectures. They are meaningless.
There is no way that a healthy relationship between us and China can continue where essentially those aspects of the integrity of your economy are still susceptible to the kinds of risks that the Chinese have imposed upon them in recent years.
Shut down, I was supposed to teach, and I haven't been told anything different, so I'm going to teach this morning. Turn your Bibles to Isaiah chapter 5. We're going to be looking at some really interesting things about what the Bible has to say about the times that we're living in. And all of the different programs that the United Nations has in store for us.
What is your view of China's positioning that they are the good guys in all of this, that the way they've managed the pandemic has been highly successful while the rest of the world has failed?
Yes, this is highly politicized, of course. It is a deliberate effort to take advantage of Western weakness at a time when democracies can be said, I'm afraid, reasonably, to have made not the best fist of all of this. It also shows how the West has failed to cooperate, whereas China has, over a massive area and with some of its partners, achieved what looks like a much more standardized approach, where you can move very rapidly and achieve very quick results in terms of test and trace. So that is undeniably a point. But this is not a medical campaign to say, listen, you must do as we do. It is a political campaign to say you are weak, your democracy doesn't serve the right purposes. Look at America, utter horror and chaos. Look at the United Kingdom, look at some parts of Europe as well. How on earth can you say that your system is better than ours when it is clearly incapable of doing anything other than making things worse? This is a very powerful political weapon, and it's being used very aggressively.
For Black Lives Matter, they have now got the picture book. to get the message right into the heart of those who don't even know how to spell yet, can't even read. As long as you know the three big letters, then you understand.
The long game for ages.
Yeah.
These books now are, accepted into curricula.
Yeah.
Because the left, years and years ago, sat down, said, how do we do this? And now they're so ingrained, them and their ideologies, whether it's BLM or the LGBTIQ agenda, etc. and so on, in our universities, in our curriculums, etc. and so forth. And what are you going to do?
So here's the thing.